a little bit of background for people who haven't been on Twitter or specifically right-wing Twitter a lot over the last few days, but there's been this big discussion argument about what is a good wage and what should young men in general, but specifically young white men do to earn a living so that they can support a family and all this kind of thing, because people have been talking about how it's harder now than it used to be. It's harder for young Zoomers or really young millennials compared to the generations that came before, right? So there's this kind of like boomer con mentality, this like pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that we've been seeing from big conservative influencers, where they're like, oh, well, did you know you could become a manager at Chipotle for $65,000 a year? That's pretty good. And then people have been trying to explain to them, like, actually, you know, $80,000 a year before taxes is not that good now. It's pretty actually hard to support a family on that. Basically, you're not going to be able to afford a home. A single income family where the man's making $80,000 a year, you're never like buying a house unless you live in Alabama or somewhere where it's really cheap. The general perception, and this seems to be accurate as far as I can tell, is that the boomers had like peak economy. We can argue whether or not it was peak culture. We can argue about a lot of things, but they had like peak economy in terms of your prospects as a young guy out of high school, out of college, your prospects of owning a home and those kinds of things. And it's gotten, for every generation since then, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse with inflation, the price of goods. Inflation has gone insane just over the last few years since COVID. This tweet here from Chris Rufo is what kind of really got a lot of, you can see here 7.3 million views. The Panda Express near my house is offering $70K a year plus benefits for the assistant manager. You can make $100K a year working at Chipotle. It's very dubious that managers at Chipotle make $100K a year. He also says, just work there for a few years and become the manager. It doesn't really work that way. If you are, you're 20 years old, you go become a dishwasher at Chipotle, you're not going to be managing the Chipotle 3 years. Is that how you say it? Chipotle?
Chipotle.
If you want to manage a Chipotle starting there with no experience and no college, you're going to be working there for like 15 years. And if you're lucky, if you have the aptitude. So this then turned, people balked at this, right? Actually, Bronze Age Pervert had a pretty good tweet. I have my disagreements with BAP. I have lots of criticisms about BAP, but he kind of like destroyed Chris Rufo here. He goes, "This is an absurd thing to post. This environment is the worst in decades and maybe ever in America to build wealth through any normal career. It's the worst work environment and worst prospects for wealth accumulation ever. For a young person, it's next to impossible. In fact, even with the best degrees and elite job, it's absurd and a joke to see conservative pundits who work as writers and commentators in media and aren't frankly exemplars of Protestant capitalist enterprise recommend working at Chipotle for a few smart young right-wing men who are deploring decades-long trends. Maybe you'll care to also give them advice on manning up and marrying a local sweet grill high school sweetheart." Yeah, basically boomer tier advice. Rufo says, "You can't really believe that young Americans have the worst prospects for wealth accumulation ever. Gen Z is accumulating wealth faster than previous generations. Yes, cost inflation is a huge problem, especially in housing. But my point is that even non-college, non-trade jobs that require minimal experience or credentials can yield a six-figure salary. And it's the same fucking people that were trying to tell you that Bidenomics are good, actually, during the election. And all these fucking Democrats were telling you, no, the economy's great. What are you talking about? Price of eggs? Price of gas? Housing costs? What do you mean? Have you seen the GDP? You know what I mean? And so then it turned into a bunch of like, boomer conservatives, boomer being the mentality here more than necessarily how old they are, talking about how they didn't like their jobs and, young people are so entitled because they think you're supposed to like your first jobs or whatever. You see like Cernovich, he's like, you're supposed to hate your job. That's why it's a job. Someone pays you because they don't want to do it. Most of us had shit jobs. It's nothing special. You're not a snowflake. Fight Club and Office Space covered this decades ago. Work sucks. This isn't new. The theme song to Friends that came out 20 years ago was supposed to tell you that life is supposed to be hard. So why are you complaining? Like, haven't you listened to the Friends theme song? And then it turned into a bunch of like these kind of anecdotes about how these people worked shitty jobs. I moved halfway across the country for better job prospects and ended up working 2 minimum wage jobs and living in a socialist co-op housing. At one point, I rented a room that was an actual closet so that I could save money. I never ate out, owned almost nothing, and saved. It wasn't until my late 20s that I had a decent paying job. I bought my first car. It cost $25. So again, this is kind of an example of like the sort of laughable advice people are giving to these young guys who are struggling. They're like, well, have you tried buying a car for $25? Why did you spend $6,000 on your car? Why didn't you just buy a car for $25? When it failed, I replaced it with a $50 car. Dude, how fucking old are you? What? Can I get a little bit more detail on the $25 car? Like, what was the make and model? Did it have wheels? Did it come with an engine? Okay, so this guy said the most disappointing thing about the old troon side of the needism get a job debate is the general lack of guys offering to help mentor, network, introduce young men and help get them placed. Oren McIntyre says, if you are worried about Andrew Tate's influence on young men telling them to climb the fast food ladder, probably isn't the move. Right. So this is where they always were like, oh, young men are turning to Andrew Tate, the pornographer. We need to give them real right-wing role models. And then the real right-wing role models are telling you to go work your way up at Panda Express. And it's like, gee, I wonder why young men would rather listen to Tate. Matt Walsh says, what do you think a young man with no work experience should get up and do today? You are insulted by the suggestion that he should get a job in customer service like we all did at that age. So what should he do? I haven't seen you guys make any practical suggestions whatsoever. Look, two things can be true. Life is supposed to be hard when you're young, and you're not supposed to have a lot of money when you're young. The point is that it's much harder. It's much harder for Zoomers, and young white males. A 22-year-old white male who's 22 today has a really harder situation that they're dealing with than previous generations. That's the point. And all your suggestions of hey man, have you tried couponing? Have you tried living with 6 roommates? Because that's what I did when I was. And it's like, if you had to do that when you were young, and you can understand that the economy is much worse now, and that your spending dollar goes way less far now than it did back then, and that the adjusted for inflation wages and the cost of living, that people have less now, then you should understand why telling them to go fucking couponing isn't really going to solve the issue. The issue is systemic. The issue is that your dollar is fucking worthless because your government has fucked you over so that they can enrich people like Zelensky in the Ukraine and people like that. The government has completely fucked you over, and only the richest elite people have benefited. Yeah, have you tried just not getting Starbucks? Yeah, exactly. All these kinds of practical suggestions that do nothing to address the reality of how hard it is, which is a very hard thing to address. And that's how you ultimately get to the point where people are making fun of you for not wanting to go dumpster diving. If anyone wonders why I post the things I post, it's because of these guys. The 23-year-old man who feels trapped by his circumstances needs to know that he can just make a change and that the stakes are far lower than he thinks. He can ride a Greyhound up to ND, North Dakota, flirt with a gal at a gas station, find himself a job in the sugar beet harvest, live in a wall tent in Talk, Arkansas, read all day at a library in coastal Maine, sleep in the ditch, dumpster dive, yogurt and bread, find a job on a Gulf oil ring, or buy a $30K house in a random town in West Virginia. Bro, have you tried just sleeping in a ditch? Oh my God, you guys. You can get shivved by a meth head on the bus, freeze to death in the North Dakota wilderness, die of exposure in some random ditch, get split in half from an oil rig mishap, or if he's lucky, he can shit himself to death after eating the rotten food he managed to find in a dumpster. What's wrong with young men these days? Here's another artifact of how effeminacy is glorified by the right wing. Our forefathers risked freezing. So he's talking about the guy who was like, oh, you don't want to die in the wilderness? Am I talking to right-wing men on here, or am I talking to their grandmothers? I can't tell. LOL, they highlight dumpster diving as if it's unbelievable to them to even consider. Dumpster diving is so funny. It's almost like an absurdist art display. The milk in the grocery store goes bad at midnight. It didn't chemically change. They move it to the dumpster at 12:30 a.m. It's still cold. Yes, you can drink it and you won't get sick. Shocking, I know. So that's, if you want practical advice, try dumpster diving, try sleeping in a ditch, stop complaining, stop being feminine. These are your conservative influencers giving you good advice. Hey, what up, family? I'm a ding dong. It is I, your boy LP, and the clip you just watched is from my live stream show, The Daily Cope, which I do 4 to 5 times a week on Rumble, Odyssey, and my other YouTube channel. I will link all of them below if you want to check it out. And thanks for watching. Hope you're having a great day, and I will catch you on the flip side. Peace out.